We are going to attempt another item. This is the hardest part of the paper. Farmers in Hoima district stored maize near a natural grassland. A beetle damaged stored grain, and repeated use of the same pesticide gradually became less effective. Pesticide resistance was controlled by a dominant allele R, while susceptible beetles had genotype RR. Before intensive pesticide use, the beetle population was assumed to be in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, and the frequency of allele small r was 0.8. 6 years later, pesticide-resistant beetles were common, natural insect predators had declined, and storage losses had increased. Pause to analyze the table. Before and after resistant beetles increases. This caused many changes in the parameters in the table. Some farmers proposed doubling the pesticide concentration. Agricultural officers instead recommended thorough grain drying, sealed storage containers, and controlled release of laboratory-reared parasitoid wasps. Task, Part A, equals. Analyze how inheritance and pesticide selection increased resistant beetles and storage losses, how the recorded changes affected maize availability and affordability. Part B. Evaluate the proposed control measures for reducing grain losses and maintaining ecological stability. Analysis. Analyze how inheritance and pesticide selection increased resistant beetles and storage losses. Inheritance. The susceptible allele frequency was R is 0.8, therefore the resistant allele frequency was R equals 0.20. Under Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, the genotype frequencies were RR equals to 0.04, RR equals 0.32, and RR equals 0.64. Since resistance was controlled by the dominant allele R, both RR and RR beetles were resistant, giving an initial resistant population of 36%. Resistant beetles survived and reproduced, transmitting allele R to their offspring. Consequently, the frequency of allele R increased over successive generations, leading to an increase in resistant beetles from 24 to 176 per grain store. Pesticide selection. Repeated use of the same pesticide exerted selection pressure on the beetle population. Susceptible RR beetles were eliminated, whereas resistant RR and RR beetles survived because the dominant R allele conferred resistance. The resistant survivors reproduced and further increased the frequency of allele R. Consequently, resistant beetles became dominant, causing greater feeding on stored maize and increasing grain damage from 9% to 38%. Analyze how the recorded changes affected maize availability and affordability. The increase in resistant beetles from 24 to 176 per grain store increased damage to stored maize, raising storage losses from 9% to 38%. Consequently, the quantity of maize available for sale declined from 520 to 318 tons, reducing maize availability. The reduced supply created scarcity, causing the average maize price to increase from 1,400 Ugandan shillings per kilogram to 2,500 Ugandan shillings per kilogram. Consequently, maize became less affordable, particularly to low-income consumers. Evaluation. Doubling the pesticide concentration. Doubling the pesticide concentration increases pesticide exposure and initially kills more susceptible beetles, temporarily reducing grain damage. However, resistant beetles carrying allele R survive and continue reproducing, accelerating resistance. Higher pesticide concentrations also kill beneficial organisms, contaminate the environment, and increase health risks. Scientific judgment, not suitable on its own because the temporary reduction in beetles is outweighed by faster resistance development and greater ecological disruption. Thorough grain drying. Thorough grain drying lowers grain moisture below the level required for beetle survival, growth, and reproduction, thereby reducing infestation and storage losses without selecting for resistance. However, poorly dried or remoistened grain allows beetles and storage fungi to develop again. Scientific judgment, suitable under proper moisture control because it effectively suppresses beetle multiplication, but its success depends on maintaining dry storage conditions. Sealed storage containers. Sealed storage containers prevent beetle entry and create low oxygen conditions that reduce insect respiration, feeding, and reproduction, thereby protecting stored grain. However, damaged containers or moist grain reduce effectiveness by allowing reinfestation or mold growth. Scientific judgment, highly suitable when properly used because it provides continuous protection without promoting pesticide resistance. Controlled release of laboratory-reared parasitoid wasps. Parasitoid wasps destroy beetle eggs or larvae, naturally reducing beetle populations while conserving biodiversity and reducing pesticide use. However, their action is slower than pesticides and may be reduced by continued pesticide application or unsuitable environmental conditions. Scientific judgment, suitable as part of integrated control because it provides sustainable long-term suppression, but cannot rapidly control severe infestations alone. Final recommendation. The most effective approach is to combine thorough grain drying, sealed storage containers, and controlled release of laboratory-reared parasitoid wasps while avoiding repeated use of the same pesticide or increasing its concentration. This integrated pest management strategy simultaneously reduces beetle survival, prevents infestation, slows the evolution of pesticide resistance, conserves beneficial organisms, minimizes grain losses, and maintains ecological stability, thereby improving maize availability and affordability.